This was actually also seen in some city fights when Russian used these human wave tactics. It has a certain logic to it because
In this video, a German combat engineer and Ukraine veteran and the Ukraine expert Dr. Colonel Reisner from the Austrian Armed Forces talk about Russian tactics and how they changed, namely Recon by fire and what some call human wave tactics. Note, the video was originally recorded on the 25th November 2024.
One point when we already speak about long distance firepower, which is often not mentioned, is how often the Russians use recon by fire. I saw the difference of this tactic throughout the years now. It's already years. And at the beginning of the war, when there was a lot still mobile warfare, they often used their mechanized assets like the BTRs, BMPs, and tanks. And for example, if you have a wood block, a little forest where they suspect Ukrainian troops, and they just drove up into the firing range and unload like a whole magazine or a few rounds of the tank and looked for a reaction, like does come fire back or so on. And then they decide, do we push further in with infantry or we level that area just with artillery if fire comes back? Now we have a transition from that. So the tactic is still in use, but it's not so much more anymore with vehicle-based firepower, but more like with artillery in combination with drones. So often they observe the artillery fire and just lay some harassment fire by the artillery on this on a certain spot and assess the footage later for the reaction. Like, are there wounded transported or get the support or other units pushed in this area to defend it more, and they it's an active used method of reconnaissance.
Yeah, and it's even very often used actually to trigger a reaction. For example, if you see that there is some kind of a staging, by using the fire to just try to push the responsible commander to attack immediately, for example, not to wait until he has all the resources he needs available. I would like to give you another example, which is also interesting, which I have already pointed out several times. You see the tactics of the Russians using motorcycles, for example, to attack against Ukrainian positions. And as someone who spent quite some time looking through the Russian Telegram channels and so on, you can even see how they discuss this tactic. But also here it's related to the Second World War, because in the Second World War, they had a formation called the Motorcycle Reconnaissance Battalion, a Motorcycle Reconnaissance Regiment. Let's say a Motorcycle Reconnaissance Battalion had as a core element one tank company, at that time a T-34-85 at the end of the war, and up to 150 motorcycles, most of them Harley-Davidson, by the way. And what did they do actually? They tried to reconnoiter more or less the German positions and to find these little gaps by using the motorcycles. And if there was a gap discovered, then they used as a first element this tank company to widen this gap, and then this motorcycle battalion was more or less followed by, let's say, heavier, stronger elements like mechanized brigades or motorized brigades. And this is what they also see today, for example. They even sometimes use smoke grenades, which they actually put on the motorcycle, and then with a drone they watch and see how far all the different motorcycles are able to penetrate into the Ukrainian lines. And the one which is the furthest one, this is the place where they actually then later on attacked by using these small elements of one or two tanks, one or two infantry fighting vehicles, and they conduct what they call the tank carousel, more or less. So to bring infantry to the spot, let them dismount and have, again, a little bit of terrain occupied from the Ukrainians, which is more and more problematic for the Ukrainians because they are running out of troops. As you know, most of the units are down to 40-50%, so that means the trenches are only half full, and this is becoming more and more problematic. Yeah.
So far, I recognize this issue. It has actually some similarities to this so-called human wave tactics. So they try to use the speed and agility to get as fast as possible close to the Ukrainian lines, and often they don't push directly with the full strength, so that the first element can sometimes trigger the fire from heavy weapons like mortars, machine guns, etc. So they can locate these heavy weapons and can directly destroy them. And if there's no fort back, they have to immediately push right into there pretty deeply. This was actually also seen in some city fights when the Russian used these human wave tactics, which was often called out to be inhumane and unnecessary from the Russian side. But it is, of course, but it has a certain logic to it because
Right, yeah, right.
if you have a break-in, you have a break-in like a full platoon or company strength at once. So it's not a small unit who breaks in. You have like a huge issue if this unit comes through. So it's very calculated if it's worth it.
I will now add some further context. First, note that the technical definition of human wave tactics is a frontal assault by densely concentrated infantry formations against the enemy line, without any attempts to shield or mask the attacker's movement, in order to overwhelm the enemy by sheer mass and shock. So just deployment of smoke or any kind of diversion would technically mean it is not a human wave tactic anymore. Generally, human wave tactics are a lot about perception, where three factors are key. Namely, the relative amount of troops of the attacker concentrates for the attack, the willingness of the attacker to take losses, and how sophisticated or unsophisticated the attack appears. Finally, if one is on the receiving end of a concentrated attack, I suspect the chances of perceiving it as a human wave attack is far higher than if one's life is not on the line, literally and figuratively. This leads us to the second part, namely historical aspects. In the Second World War, the Western Allies focused on keeping their losses low and relied more on firepower. The Red Army focused on speed in order to overwhelm the Wehrmacht. To quote, "And the key to success in the offensive was speed. If tempo was not being gained from the start, the Germans would not be destabilized and forced into an increasingly belated reactive posture, and the battle would become an attritional grind after the fashion of the Orel operation of the previous year. Casualties would be high and the results inconclusive. Better that the first echelon endured heavy losses to ensure a quick breakthrough so the exploitation echelon could accomplish the enemy's destruction through fast-moving, lower cost and decisive maneuver. As such, it can be hard to determine if a costly attack that was successful might have saved more lives than several attacks that failed." About the perception of sophistication, it also comes down to the fact what can be effectively accomplished with the current available resources and training. Only speedy reactions will result in preemption of the enemy's deployment and seizure of initiative. Hence the Soviets' preference at the tactical level for simple, easily understood, and rapidly implemented battle drills. Big thank you to Dr. Colonel Reisner and Buttjer Freimann for this talk. Note this is an outtake from a longer talk between the two. Thank you for watching and see you next time.